Too funny. Okay, I think we're good to kick off, Derek, whenever you're ready.
Great. Yeah. Hi, my name is Derek Gunderson, and just on behalf of the Northwestern Center on Law, Business, and Economics, which hosts the Workforce Science Project, just want to welcome everyone here today for the webinar. And I'm just gonna that's basically it. I'm going to turn it over to Deborah Weiss, Director of our Workforce Science Project. Thank you.
Thank you, Derek. We're delighted to see you all here at the Career Meetup webinar. Please put any questions you have in the chat, and we'll try our best to get to them. And again, we encourage networking by sharing your LinkedIn info and connecting to all. We have a great panel. I'd like to welcome our moderator Richard Rosenow, who's the VP of People Analytics Strategy at One Model. Richard?
Hi, everybody. Thank you, Deborah. Welcome, everybody, to this. I think this is our 7th session of the Career Meetup. We've had a really wonderful run of folk coming in, getting connected, getting referrals, and generally connecting people to their careers and learning about kind of what's going on across the space. So we've got a bit of an exciting one today. So we've got joining us today is Ryan Colthorpe from Okta. We're going to learn a little bit more about him and about Okta and about what's going on over there throughout the conversation today. But I'll say too, we want to really focus in on one person for this call, because Ryan's got a little bit more of a senior role in his team he's looking to hire for. And we wanted to make sure we give it a little bit more time and space. So by the end of the call too, as you get your survey about feedback, if you want to send us a little bit of a note, let us know how we did, how that happened. If you got what you're looking for out of the call today, that'd be really helpful. Without further ado, Ryan, welcome to the call and thank you for being on here today.
Yeah, Richard, thank you for inviting me to this. Thank you for everyone who's attending today. Really looking forward to this conversation.
Awesome. So Ryan, we had a chance to catch up a little bit ahead of time, and I heard a bit of your journey. And you've had a fascinating career. And you've been across a couple other spots within HR, which I think would be really helpful for a lot of people on the call to hear about kind of where you were, how you came to, and how you ended up where you are today. I would love to hear a little bit about your path. Yeah,
that's great, Richard. I think it's a good question. I would say that I'm probably like a prime example that career paths are rarely a straight line. Mine is not a straight line at all. It's got a lot of bends, a lot of curves. It's windy. I actually did a degree in political science communications. The obvious question is like, what do you do next? So I actually wanted to go and become a dean of students. So I pursued a master's degree in higher education administration at the School of Education at Columbia University. So I worked for a few years in higher education, living in New York. I quickly learned there's a reason why change, transformation, speed are not words that are commonly associated with university administration. I also learned that living in New York City on an educator's salary is pretty difficult. So I made a jump, and that's how I got into HR. So I was like an admissions officer at Columbia University, and I realized I could transfer those skills into campus recruiting. So I made a jump to JP Chase, and was a campus recruiter for a couple of years. I ended up being a recruiting manager, and then decided that I no longer wanted to continue in the path of recruiting, and kind of made a career change into HR project management. So I worked for a number of years in project management, change management, kind of transformation, internal consulting for JP Chase. It's a very large company, 250,000 people, 60 countries. So I really got to see how companies do things at large scale and how you really build and sustain processes for a very large organization. After the financial crisis, especially, what was happening in the financial services, a lot of focus was spent on regulatory reform. It's not the most exciting topic. So I decided to make a jump. I decided to kind of use the skills and kind of the path that I was on. And I was looking to get out of financial services for a number of reasons. And I wanted to get into tech. So at the time, I was focused on finding a company that had an HR product. I really kind of honed my search on LinkedIn. I actually used LinkedIn to see who I was connected with at LinkedIn. Ended up finding that one of my college friend's wife worked at LinkedIn. So she referred me, which, only really got me my foot in the door from an interview perspective. And then kind of turns out that, I moved across the country to pursue this opportunity. My last project as a project manager at LinkedIn was funding and building a business case around building out a workforce planning function at LinkedIn. I did several projects, kind of supporting our people analytics function. You really kind of like mapping out where, kind of data reporting and dashboards, who owns it between, kind of HR technology, around analytics, around workforce planning, around PPPs, around operations. So I had a lot of experience working with people analytics teams, but more from a project management standpoint. So I was able to get funding, get that approved to build workforce planning function and kind of help build out the operational components and do a lot of kind of special projects on building out our workforce planning capabilities at LinkedIn. During the pandemic, I realized that, LinkedIn was going remote. I made the decision, with my wife, that we would move back to the Midwest. I was based in Sunnyvale, California at the time. We made a move back to the Midwest, located here in Chicago. So we kind of planted ourselves like a lot of people did during the pandemic. My rationale was like, I'll still be in a location where LinkedIn has an office if by chance they kind of pivot the pendulum back to more in-office work. During that move, shortly after we relocated, I got a call from Okta that they were building out a workforce planning function. They didn't have any people analytics staff at the time. The head of kind of people operations and shared services had a background in finance, so he was pretty savvy, in Tableau and kind of building out some of the reporting and dashboards. So I accepted that position and have been at Okta for about 2.5 years. It'll be 3 years this fall. So it's been a great journey so far.
That's fantastic to hear. Thank you, Ryan. It's interesting you said too about kind of the project management side. Whenever I see someone project management that's in the people analytics space, I try to track them down and hold them a little closer, because it's something that plagues a lot of teams, is that like triaging and understanding who does what and the roles. And I've seen a lot of teams that try to just solve by just hiring more doers.
Yeah.
But where they really just need, like, how do we all stitch together and why are we all here? And so I love that you have that in your background. And I think that's a tremendous thing you bring to the table.
Yeah, and I think it kind of ties in. I know, one of the questions you wanted to ask was around just like the definition of workforce planning. I think that's, when you commonly use, it's commonly used the refrain that it's like, workforce planning is really about having the right talent, with the right skills, in the right places at the right times for the right costs. Which it seems really, really simple, from like a, just like, okay, that's a simple, formula that we need to follow. It's very complex though. Not a lot of companies do it well, or they do it at all. It's a long journey as well. It takes several years. It involves a lot of cross-functional teams. There's also the fundamental requirement that a company needs to have a detailed multi-year company strategy in order to do it very well. And I think that's what really set me apart for Okta, is that they were looking at people who maybe were more technical or analytical than I was, but realized that in order to build this out, you really needed a lot more from a transformation and change management background, pulling teams together to get on the journey. I saw this at LinkedIn when we were trying to roll out some of our operational workforce planning capabilities, that it was really a lot of relationship building trust, getting people on the same kind of bandwagon, so to speak, aligned to a vision of where you're trying to go with this. So I think that was really kind of what stood out for me, in getting the role at Okta. And I think this really allowed us, when I joined Okta, to roll out some of our core operational processes that really connected together our headcount to hire processes. So we're able to connect together our finance tools with our HCM, as well as our ATS, or applicant tracking system, to really have that foundational ability to track and report headcount with future hires, as well as being able to kind of track attrition and kind of really track our kind of staffing to target, which was a really important, probably the most important metric that Okta was looking at from a people analytics standpoint, because we're going through hyper growth. Okta grew, when I joined, it was around 2,000 people, and during the pandemic we more than doubled in size, almost tripled in size. So it's really kind of went through rapid growth. And again, that focus was just, from the CEO on down, looking at our ability to hire as many people as possible during that time. So it was really an important piece of getting those, those things connected together. So I'd say, we were good at really the right talent in the right places. I would probably more of the right talent at the right times. And now that we kind of are, slowed down a little bit from a hiring perspective, we're really looking more around the places we're hiring talent, the cost of the talent. And then we, fundamentally want to be more inward focused to look at the skills of the talent, right? And I think that's a journey that most companies go on, that it's like, that's something that a lot of companies have, cracked successfully. And I think that's something that we're going to see with some of the AI tools and that are available on the market for companies to be able to look inward and kind of pull information that they don't have on their employees, and kind of like pull that externally to kind of source talent internally.
So much gold in what you're saying there. I was taking some notes to make sure I got some quotes here. But one of the things that really jumped out, that realized that in order to build it out, you really need the transformational change management background and pulling teams along the journey. And I think that's something that, to jump from analyst to director or from analyst to VP, to make that leap, it is a little bit of that like recognition that the real difficult part of this whole space is not the data sometimes. It's actually the coordination and the change management pieces of it. So no, I love that you're bringing that with you. I would say maybe just before we get too much further too, Okta seems to be everywhere now, but for people who might not know about Okta, could you just tell us a little bit about what Okta's up to and how have the last couple of years changed what the company's doing? Yeah, it's a great question. I find that if it's like one of these things where I tell people I work for Okta, it's like, oh yeah, I use that product at my company. You're like, no idea what that is. So Okta, as kind of leader in identity solutions, we work across multiple industries. Obviously, we had a lot of success with tech companies. That's kind of really some of the bread and butter, but we're also kind of moving beyond that, or have moved beyond that. We also are, dabbling and really kind of breaking into the education and government space. So that's been a high growth area for us over the last couple of years. We have two main products that's focused on connecting a client's workforce or their customers to technology. So our workforce product, you can think of it as kind of like authentication, single sign-on platform. So your company has multiple applications, you have, X amount of employees, they get access to these applications, and it's kind of a way to manage that. And then from a customer standpoint, it's a way to authenticate and validate that these are the customers that you're, kind of selling a product to. And probably people that kind of don't really know it, they might have used an Okta-powered experience. If you, for example, if you booked a flight on JetBlue, or if you've attended a Major League Baseball game, or stayed at an MGM resort, those are actually, kind of customer identity products in the background. Yeah, so it's like you wouldn't even know it, but it's actually an Okta experience or Okta product, Okta code in the background doing that. And then some of our large, kind of like some, premier brands from a workforce customer standpoint, Zoom, Priceline, Flex, T-Mobile, and S&P, they use it from their workforce identity management standpoint. And the funny thing is, I used Okta when I was at LinkedIn. I, didn't really think much of it. It was a great product. It was very seamless. It was very simple to use. So it's like, I was a fan of it just because it like really simplified your kind of login experience. The company's been around, it was founded in 2009, went public in 2017. I unfortunately joined much after that. So I didn't catch that wave. And, one of the reasons why I moved back to the Midwest is I didn't join a tech company pre-IPO. And then, as I mentioned, it's just, again, over the last, pandemic really put us in overdrive because it was the perfect product to kind of solve a lot of solutions. Oh, sure. When you think about it, it's like, hey, people are in offices, on-prem technology. That's like, oh yeah, we need to connect or kind of move things to the cloud. Our workforce identity solution is like a perfect example. And then again, our customer identity solution has just been really taking off. We acquired a company called Auth0 a couple of years ago, so that really kind of put it in overdrive. That's fantastic. There's something I think a lot about is I think Adam Grant popularized this thing where he said, like, to get satisfaction in life, like look backwards and think about where you were and try to talk to yourself in that position. I'd love to hear, because you've had a fascinating career and you've done a lot of really phenomenal things across a lot of different companies. If you could go back and give some advice to that person in New York, kind of pursuing education and thinking about that and wondering what was next, what's some advice you'd want to pass on to your younger self? Yeah, I would. This is very simple. I would say that anyone's career, it's not a sprint; it's a marathon, right? That it's like it's over the long term. Most people unfortunately aren't able to work for 5 years or 10 years or 20 years. That you're going to be working for a long period of time. So you really need to kind of think of it from a really kind of a longevity standpoint. That it's like you might not
to get to where you want to go, it's going to take a couple sprints along the way and kind of maybe some longer slogs, or you might be in a role or a position or a company longer than you want to be. But it's like over the, kind of the course of your career, that's just kind of a little snippet of it. So that's just kind of like high level advice that I would say I would give. The other thing that I think, if I look back, if I could, do things differently, it might be that it's like, I might have said no too often to things that I didn't want to do, but at the same time, I looked at it's like, especially when I was in financial services, like, oh, you're great at leading this like audit team. It's like, that does not sound interesting or appealing to me, or a regulatory team. It's just like, that's not really what I want to do. So I might have missed some like upward progression, but I finally was able to find over time, especially in project management, that it was like you work with subject matter experts in centers of excellence on implementing new processes or new programs. Nothing really caught my attention until like workforce planning. But I was like, hey, I think this is something that I want to do, something I love. So it took a little while to find that, and then kind of the people analytics piece is kind of naturally tied to that. The other thing I would say is find the tie that kind of really, the string that kind of threads it through, right? And so for me, it's always been around like relationship management and in collaboration. So it's like, if you look at, starting a career in higher education, that kind of ties through that. It's like, I think that is like when I do like, personality inventories, that's like always comes out that it's like, that's more of my personality of bringing people along a journey, bringing people along, from like a project standpoint, or just like an implementation standpoint, or a transformation standpoint of like, coming up with like, what is the collective goal and the vision for it? It always comes through, and I'm always kind of like, similar type of, no matter the personality inventory, it's always like a similar theme that comes out.
That's a great thing. That's a great theme to find. And I think about it like, we tend to look at our careers like job I had. But the reality is like, you add that extra dimension and you see across them, you suddenly start to see that golden light kind of coming across all of them. You're like, hey, I keep finding these things that light me up in these ways, and I bring my best self when I'm in these positions. And that's a great takeaway to have. So let's dive into the open role a little bit. Would love to hear about you've got a new open role in your team. If you could talk a little bit about kind of the history of that space and then what brought about this investment, it'd be great to hear a little bit more about the role.
Yeah, that's great. We at Okta, again, as I mentioned, when I was hired, we didn't have a people analytics function. We didn't have anyone dedicated to people analytics. And this was 2 years ago, right? So it's like we're relatively, newish in the space, so to speak. In that time, we fired, kind of 4 dedicated people analytics, kind of partners. So, it's still relatively a small team considering, we're less than 6,000 people. I think what, sets us apart is that we're able to, because we're small, we were able to implement a lot of the foundational or functional things that were needed, so we don't really have a lot of like process debt, or there's a little bit of data debt like every company has, but it's not a lot, meaning that it's like, we're able to kind of like, I think some of the HR leaders that we had, and worked at scale at, like, for instance, Microsoft or Meta, and saw that's like, hey, if you don't do this right the first time, it takes a long time to undo this or kind of like rebuild it, or kind of refresh it, right? So I would say that what's kind of sets us apart from a lot of other companies is that I think we made a lot of, and again, it's no credit to me, but a lot of foundational decisions early on of the way to structure, HR processes and systems and tools. We're not perfect by any means, but there's a lot of like building blocks that were set in place to kind of allow us to build upon. This role is going to be, kind of leading the team of 4. Some of the things that we're really focused on. My role is, and I think this is, I think you might have want to ask this question as well. Like, how does workforce planning and people analytics fit together? In my, kind of mind, it's our people analytics, team or function should support your workforce plan, your strategy for your workforce, which should obviously align to your company's long-term, kind of vision and strategy as well, right? So. To me, the people analytics function is kind of the glue and the engine, both kind of glue and engine to kind of really drive that strategic workforce plan forward. And that's, to me, kind of the most important part. We're really moving and shifting away. We built a lot of great dashboards. We automated some reports that have been done manually in terms of like our executive, staffing to target our headcount, kind of targets dashboards that goes out to our exec staff on a biweekly basis, or attrition, kind of reports that go out on a monthly basis. We have a lot of like great foundational dashboards and tools put together where we're trying to make this pivot, and where this person will be instrumental in this role is taking us beyond that it's like we're not just a team that can give you data or insights. It's actually helping you come up with solutions, come up with recommendations. And I think this is kind of a misconception for people analytics teams. That's like, oh yeah, they're just, the team behind the scenes are just pumping out the data that I need, and then maybe they can give me some insights for it. I think that's where the field is heading or needs to head. And I think that's just, even with AI, that's like most jobs need to have, kind of head that way, where it's like, you're not just, transactional in the cog in the wheel, that you're actually helping from a solution standpoint.
That's fantastic. And one of the things I liked when you were telling me about this role was that this people analytics team sits within your broader team. And that broader team has so that they'll have some peers that lead other functions within the HR group. Could you just briefly talk about that broader team too?
Yeah, it's great. It's kind of an interesting setup. We roll up under our kind of people operations, or kind of HR shared services function. On my team, it's interesting mix. We've got our people analytics team. We've got like an operational workforce planning team. We've got a recruiting operations team, and then a team, again, small teams. When I say team, it's kind of, the operational workforce planning is one, recruiting ops is 3 people, and then our global outsourcing is 2 people. So it's like we're pretty lean and mean, but all this fits together because I view it that it's like, it really kind of touches like the headcount to hire experience in a lot of ways. It's really, about, and kind of our team really supports that, kind of the hiring of the workforce, the planning of the workforce, planning, then hiring the workforce, and then kind of like the movement of the workforce, that it's like how teams are resourced, what positions they're in, when kind of large, from an operational standpoint, when large reorgs happen or things of that nature, our team supports that. And we also really help support from an annual and long range planning standpoint, really thinking about your resource mix. So again, we have part of like the contingent workforce arm underneath my remit that's looking at, hey, which types of roles that might be repeatable or transactional we could potentially look from an outsourcing standpoint.
That's a great mix, and it's a peer group around action, which I really appreciate, because I think that phrase like insights without action is overhead.
Yeah,
I think we've all heard that a little bit in the people analytics space, but it's a dangerous one when you're on your own, when you're doing the insights by yourself instead of it being part of like an action-oriented group. And as we're thinking about that too, when you think about like where's the business need coming that this people analytics team is going to go after, you've talked a little bit about the partnership, but thinking about like, are there certain, and you don't have to dig too deep into kind of private details about the company, because I know everyone's got their own kind of shop and things going on, but is there a certain business investment that's happening right now that's driving a little bit of this investment for the team?
Yeah, it's a great question. Some of the areas we've been focused on, kind of last year and then continuing into this year and probably for the coming years, is first around location expansion. Okta, from a workforce standpoint, was very domestically focused. We've hired a company called Auth0. Prior to that, Okta was like, we had sales teams internationally, but our engineering presence was like Canada was like the most international that we really went. We acquired this company called Auth0. The 2 co-founders were from Argentina. They were much more work from anywhere, hire talent anywhere. There's pros and cons to doing that, because like maybe you spread too far, or maybe there's risk in certain countries you're going into. So it's like you strike that healthy balance. So that's kind of what we're kind of focused now of looking at our international mix. So really kind of leading the analysis and the charge around location expansion. I was able to help set up kind of a framework on how we consider new locations, kind of what is the business case around it? What's the due diligence we need to do? What is the kind of type of data that we need to bring to the table to help make these decisions? Other things that we're looking at is really around organization, org design. I think that's, probably most companies are doing that now of just like, okay, we were in hyper growth, we grew, didn't really put much thought in terms of org design, but really looking at that. I think that's going to be like a focus at a lot of companies. The other piece, obviously, around diversity, we made a commitment internally to kind of be more transparent about our diversity numbers, and kind of our team has played an important role of kind of publishing stats and data around that. And actually sharing it within the company. So those are kind of like 3 areas that we're focused on. There's many more, but those are kind of like the top 3 that come to mind.
Yeah, those are great areas. I've got a couple more questions for you here, and then we'll make sure we open it up to the folk on the line too. So for the folk on the line, if you've got some questions that you're starting to think about, or if Ryan sparks something loose, make sure you drop it in the chat. You can drop it in now. Don't worry, you won't derail us. But then I'll start kind of pulling from there to make sure we're kind of talking about those and making sure we address those throughout the call here. But Ryan, as we're thinking about the role, coming back to this position, for this role in particular, what does success look like? And I know we talked about this a little bit, but are there things about this role that are different than the rest of Okta, or things that are similar? Just like a year from now, if this person was wildly successful, what sorts of things would you see?
Yeah, I think, and this probably isn't too different, that I say, you come into a role, it's like you have to kind of like assess the environment, assess the kind of the need, ask a lot of questions, but in success at Okta, it's like really people who, again, we're not that large of, in comparison, it's like maybe if you worked at a much smaller companies, it's Okta is massive, but for me, it's like compared to like a Microsoft or a JP Morgan, or even like an Uber or something like that, it's still like a relatively small company. So it's really you still can operate and execute pretty quickly. So I think that's like a success criteria. It's like you got to come in and start putting some wins on the board quickly. At the same time, it's like those I think that have been highly successful or the most successful are the ones that put wins on the board and execute quickly, but also do this cross-functionally, that they're not bulldozing over people or not excluding stakeholders or not thinking upstream or downstream about processes they implement, because that just never works from a scale perspective. It's just like, oh yeah, we didn't think about these stakeholders and now we're stuck with this process, right? For this role itself, I think it's really that focus on changing the perception. It's perception and kind of really the focus of the team. Away from just going back in the corner and building dashboards that people can use. Again, that's another thing. Like usage is really dependent on enabling people. So we're really moving the focus to enablement. That it's like we reset our vision for the team. That it's really around enablement, enabling people to use data and insights and coming up with recommendations. So that to me is like where somebody in a year's time, when you go out to like our key stakeholders, like the HR business partners, and they kind of look back to say, hey, where is this team? How would you evaluate this team? What would you say about this team a year ago versus now? They would say, hey, they're partners, right? They're not just order takers. I think that's going to be like the big, win. If we can do that, from a year's time from now and, go to our HRVP stakeholders and they say that, to me, that's like the biggest measure of success.
That's a good one to think about. It's one that not many people analytics teams measure themselves very well. I think it's a little bit of that like cobbler's children have no shoes sort of thing. Like the people analytics team rarely gets to measure itself, but it's a really good measure of success around that. Like, how does the HRBP organization view us? Is it a partnership view? Is it we're there to just fulfill those orders, like you said? So I really like that measure.
Yeah, and I think it's it's more like persona based. And I think that's the reality that a lot of people analytics functions go through. That it's like it's not maybe again, when we were in hyper growth, our focus was around, how many people can we hire? So it's like a lot of like, what are your headcount targets? What is like the recruiting capacity that you have? And it's really looking at it from more like a finance lens of like, okay, we construct the hierarchy based on cost centers, right? Whereas, no one else really at the company really thinks like that, especially our HR business partners. They're like, well, we're thinking about this from like a leader, hierarchy, not so much from a construction of a cost center hierarchy. And sometimes they mimic, but oftentimes they don't. I think that's really kind of like where the shift in our team is going. That it's like, hey, like we're shifting direction in terms of where our focus is and kind of where our stakeholders is more internal, versus external that we need to hire. And that's kind of like the number one priority from an HR perspective.
That's fantastic. I think if you ever need like a war story from a people analytics person, just say the word hierarchy and you'll just see the blood drain from their face of like, everyone has a war story with the hierarchy, or they had to switch it from one to another. They had to implement it. They had to do position management. They had to do something in the nature. It's a wild thing. I think for folk that are in the field for a long time, that word hierarchy just holds a special place in the people analytics problem solving kit.
It does. And that was, it's a question of like, who does it well? And it's like, well, there's different options of how you do it. And it's like, they all have trade-offs, pros and cons. And,
Yeah, definitely a trigger word, Arthur. That's funny. So I'll wrap up our recording with kind of a final question, and then we'll open it up for Q&A a little bit off the record. What excites you about what's coming for Okta?
Yeah.
So if you're thinking about your next couple of years there, as you're building your career still, like, what is it that's exciting going on that you'd like to share with folk?
Yeah. And again, I kind of going back to this about the marathon piece, like, one of the things is like, it's very common to see people jump jobs, kind of like more frequently, 2 years, 3 years, a year. Like for me, and again, maybe this is just like the project management, change management, transformation lens that I try to put on things, that it's like, you typically can't, make large scale transformation in a year. It's very rare that you can do that. It takes time, where it's like, maybe you make the first phase of a transformation in a year or 6 months, whatever it is, but it's like really to get where you are or where you want to go to that vision of really kind of going to like strategic workforce planning. That's a multi-year strategy, right? So for me, there's just a lot of like white space still in workforce planning, people analytics space at Okta, and really from our people and places roadmap. But what also excites me is that Okta is just really, even though again we experienced this tremendous growth in terms of our revenue and headcount, kind of during the pandemic. But there's still so much opportunity from like a customer standpoint, domestically, but more so internationally, that there's so many companies and customers out there we haven't tapped. And that's really kind of a big focus on our international expansion. That to me is really exciting, that there's just a lot of like runway for the company. I also think that, it's like, well, how does AI change this? I think there's potentially a huge part Okta can play with the authentication of like machine to machine or bot to bot connections, like that we haven't really thought about, or maybe, we are thinking about internally right now of how that works or what that is or what the future of that is. That it's like, it's not so much like a human connecting to something, it's a bot connecting to something, right? So there's a lot of just opportunity out there. So I'm really excited about that. And then I think, again, about this position and kind of the team and the role, there's just a huge demand for it, that it's like, we've kind of gone on this change management journey. You've kind of shared, hey, we're making this pivot of our team. So there's just a lot of excitement from the people and places function that they want to get on board with this and kind of really support it and kind of view it as a partnership. And again, I mentioned this before, really for a people analytics team, in my view, to kind of be successful, they really need to understand the business and understand the problems that they're trying to solve, and kind of like, so my view of it is like, okay, it's a two-way street. Like, it's like, we can come to the table and help you as an HRBP, but you also need to help us, like educate our team members that, you're supporting go-to-market. It's like, share with us, like, go-to-market career path, share with us, like, where go-to-market is going in the next years, what's their strategy. So it's like they're brought to the table and kind of educated about this that can help solve those problems, and I think people are on board with that, that it's going to be, kind of a two-way street in terms of the support.
That's great. Well, I'll tell you, I'm excited for you. I'm excited for Okta. I'm excited for the person that lands in this role. If folk want to reach out to you, apply, or send you referrals, how should they go about that?
Yeah, either way, connect on LinkedIn, apply the job directly. But yeah, probably LinkedIn is probably the easiest one.
That makes
sense. I'm not plugging that because I work there.
You still got those options you got to vest. Okay, so Derek, we can close out the recording for now. And thank you, Ryan, for being part of that too.